My mom said, "We borrowed most of your inheritance for your sister's wedding." My sister smiled sweetly. "You didn't really need it." I couldn't stop laughing, because they didn't realize that the money they moved was. The first thing I did when my mom said they had borrowed most of my inheritance was laugh. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous one. I actually had to grab the edge of the kitchen counter because I couldn't stop. My mom looked confused. My sister, Amanda, just kept smiling like she'd practiced it in the mirror. We were sitting at my parents' house, the same place I grew up in outside Columbus. The same dining table where my grandfather used to slide me crossword puzzles when I was 12 and tell me I was the only one who'd make something steady out of myself. He left me $312,000 when he died 2 years ago. It wasn't a surprise. He told everyone at Thanksgiving. He said it was for my future, my house, or if life threw something unfair at me. Life had thrown something unfair at me. I just hadn't told them. Mom folded her hands together and said they needed to explain something before I saw the account statement. Apparently that was my cue. They had moved most of the money. Temporarily, she said. For Amanda's wedding. The venue in Napa. The live band. The imported flowers. Things you only do once in a lifetime. Amanda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't really need it," she said. That was when I started laughing. Because they thought I didn't need it. They had no idea that 3 months ago I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. The kind that quietly eats through your savings before it eats through you. The kind where insurance covers enough to keep you alive but not enough to keep you safe. I never told them. I didn't want to be the fragile daughter again. Growing up, Amanda had the spotlight. Pageants, sorority president, engagement ring that probably cost more than my car. I was the quiet one. The practical one. The one who didn't need much. Apparently that included my own inheritance. Mom kept talking. She said they planned to pay it back over time. Amanda and her fiancé Derek would help once they got settled. It was just sitting there, she said. It wasn't doing anything. It was doing something. It was earning interest in a restricted trust account that, according to my grandfather's lawyer, could not legally be accessed without my signature. And I had never signed anything. I stopped laughing. I asked one question. Who authorized the transfer? Dad finally spoke. He said Grandpa had made him co-trustee for convenience. That wasn't true. I knew it wasn't true. I remembered the paperwork signing. Grandpa was sharp until the end. Amanda tilted her head and asked why I was making such a big deal out of this. You have a job, Sid. You rent a tiny apartment. You don't even travel. It's not like you had plans for it. I almost told them about the treatment plan sitting in my bag. About the clinical trial in Boston that required a relocation deposit I didn't have. About the estimate I'd gotten last week that made my hands shake. Instead I nodded. I said okay. That confused them more than the laughing. I left 20 minutes later with leftovers I didn't want and a copy of the wedding invitation tucked into my purse like a souvenir of betrayal. When I got into my car I didn't cry. I called someone. Not my mom. Not my sister. I called Mr. Halpern. My grandfather's attorney. And the first thing he said after I explained what happened was this. Sydney, that money is not legally accessible to your parents. Then he went quiet for a second. And asked me to come into his office first thing in the morning. Because according to the records, no transfer had ever been approved. I barely slept that night. Not because I was sad. Not even because I was scared. Because something wasn't adding up. If no transfer had been approved, then where did the money for Napa come from? Mr. Halpern's office smelled like old paper and coffee. He didn't waste time with small talk. He pulled a thick folder from his cabinet and turned it toward me. The trust was airtight. Grandpa had set it up 6 months before he passed. I was the sole beneficiary. Mr. Halpern was the primary trustee. My father was listed only as a successor trustee in case Mr. Halpern became incapacitated. My father had zero authority to move a dollar. I felt something shift in my stomach. Mr. Halpern logged into the trust account in front of me. The balance was intact. All $312,000 plus interest. Untouched. I stared at the screen. Then what did they move? Mr. Halpern frowned. He asked if I had any other accounts connected to my grandfather. I didn't. He was careful about that. Plus, there had been one other thing. When Grandpa died, my parents insisted on helping me consolidate some of my older savings accounts. I was grieving. I signed whatever they put in front of me. They said it would simplify taxes. I had never checked. My hands felt cold. I logged into my personal savings account from my phone. It took a second to load. Then the number appeared. $14.82. I didn't remember the exact balance before, but I knew it wasn't $14. Mr. Halpern asked when I last reviewed this account. I told him probably over a year ago. He asked who else had access. I didn't answer right away, because I knew. Back then my dad said it would be easier if he was added as a joint holder, just temporarily. He said banks made things complicated for young people. I believed him. Mr. Halpern asked me to pull the transaction history. There was multiple transfers. Large ones. Over the last 9 months. They hadn't touched the trust. They had drained me. My personal savings. The account I had built since I was 16. The account my grandfather had quietly added birthday checks to for years before the trust even existed. Amanda's wedding venue deposit. Cater. Floral designer. Even the honeymoon suite in Italy. All funded by me. I felt strangely calm. Like my body hadn't caught up to the betrayal yet. Mr. Halpern asked if I had authorized any of it. No. He nodded once and said we needed to act fast. Then he said something that made my skin prickle. Sydney, these transfers were not small rounding errors. They were deliberate. Structured to avoid automatic fraud alerts. That meant planning. That meant knowledge. That meant my father didn't just impulsively borrow something for Amanda's big day. He engineered it. I stared at the list of transactions again, and then I saw the last one. 3 days ago. A transfer labeled final vendor balance. That was the day before my mom invited me over to talk. They already knew I was about to see the account. They just didn't realize which account I would check first. Mr. Halpern leaned back in his chair and asked if I wanted to pursue recovery. I thought about the clinical trial brochure folded in my bag. The deadline to secure a spot was in 3 weeks. I thought about Amanda squeezing my hand and telling me I didn't need it. And I started laughing again. But this time Mr. Halpern didn't look confused. He looked concerned. Because I told him yes. And I told him I wanted everything back. Every cent. Even if it meant ruining a wedding. I didn't tell my parents I had gone to see Mr. Halpern. I let them think I had accepted it. 2 days later, Mom called to ask if I could help assemble welcome bags for Amanda's guests. Apparently folding custom napkins was now a family bonding activity. I went. Amanda's fiancé Derek was there, sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through vendor emails. He barely looked up when I walked in. There were champagne bottles lined up on the counter with tags that said A and D forever. I kept thinking about the transaction labeled final vendor balance. Mom handed me ribbon and said they were so relieved I understood about the money. She said families support each other. I asked how much the wedding was costing in total. Amanda said around $400,000, but that included everything. The vineyard buyout. The rehearsal yacht dinner. The fireworks permit. Fireworks. For a wedding that was already paid for with money that wasn't theirs. I asked how they managed the rest of it. Amanda smiled and said Derek's parents contributed generously. Derek finally looked up and added that they had also taken a short-term bridge loan to cover timing gaps. Totally normal, he said. Once the gifts came in they would settle things. Bridge loan. That word stayed with me. After a few hours of ribbon tying and fake normal conversation, I asked casually if they had already paid all vendors in full. Amanda said yes. She didn't want any loose ends. Dad chimed in from the living room that everything was locked in. Locked in. That night, Mr. Halpern filed a formal demand letter to the bank requesting an immediate freeze on the joint account and a forensic review of the transfers. Because my father had structured the withdrawals to avoid alerts, it triggered something else once flagged manually. Internal fraud escalation. The next morning my dad called me. He asked if I had spoken to the bank. I said I had noticed some discrepancies. He went quiet for a few seconds and then said I was overreacting. He said paperwork could fix it after the wedding. I asked him why the money had been split into smaller transfers over months instead of one transparent conversation. He didn't answer that. Instead he said something that almost impressed me with its boldness. He said if I caused problems now vendors might back out. Deposits could be lost. It would embarrass Amanda in front of hundreds of guests. I told him I wasn't the one who structured fraudulent transfers. There was silence on the line. Then he hung up. That afternoon Mr. Halpern called me with an update. The bank had confirmed that the joint account had been used as a pass-through. My savings had been drained into a secondary account in my father's name before being sent to vendors. That meant two things. One, this was traceable. Two, if I filed a civil claim immediately, any unpaid balances tied to those funds could be legally contested. I asked him what that meant in plain English. He said if we moved fast enough, some vendors might reverse payments once notified the funds were disputed. I thought about the fireworks, and then my phone buzzed. It was Amanda. Just saw Dad is stressed. Please don't do anything dramatic. I stared at the message for a long time. She still thought I was bluffing. She still thought I didn't need it. What she didn't know was that I had already signed paperwork that morning authorizing Mr. Halpern to initiate legal recovery proceedings. What she also didn't know was something else. The clinical trial coordinator in Boston had emailed me back. They had one final slot open. But they needed proof of financial clearance within 14 days. 14. Amanda's wedding was in 12. Everything started moving at once. On Monday, Mr. Halpern filed the civil complaint. Quietly. No dramatic court appearance. Just paperwork that carried a lot more weight than my family understood. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 vendors had been formally notified that portions of their payments were under dispute due to alleged unauthorized transfers. On Wednesday morning, Amanda called me 13 times. I let it go to voicemail. Then Derek called. He said their wedding planner had contacted them in a panic. The vineyard in Napa was requesting confirmation that funds were not tied to active fraud litigation. Apparently their insurance required it. I hadn't expected vendors to react that fast. Derek asked me directly if I had done something. I said I corrected something. He said deposits could be frozen. The yacht company was already reviewing their contract. The fireworks company had paused shipment pending verification. That one almost made me smile. By that evening, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. She said I was humiliating the family. She said Amanda was barely sleeping. I asked if Amanda had slept well the last 9 months while draining my account. Mom didn't answer that. Instead, she said something that finally made everything click. She said they assumed I wouldn't notice because I never spent money anyway. Not because they needed it desperately. Not because there was no other option. Because I was the quiet one. Because I was sick and tired all the time and they mistook that for passive. Because they thought I wouldn't fight back. The next morning, Mr. Halpern forwarded me an email from the bank's fraud department. They had completed a preliminary review. The pattern of transfers met the internal threshold for intentional structuring, which meant this was no longer just a civil matter. It was potentially criminal. He asked me one question. Did I want to escalate this beyond recovery? I stared at the message for a long time. Then my phone buzzed again. It was Amanda. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can pay you back after the wedding. Don't ruin this for me. I looked around my apartment at the unopened medical bills on the table. 14 days to secure treatment. 10 days until her wedding. I finally replied to Mr. Halpern. Yes. Escalate. The word criminal travels fast. By Friday, my dad had retained his own attorney. I found that out through Mr. Halpern, not from him. The bank formally froze the secondary account in my father's name. Whatever was left in it was locked. Which wasn't much because most of it had already gone to vendors. But freezing it triggered something worse for them. The bridge loan Derek mentioned. Apparently, the lender required verification that no active fraud investigations were tied to the borrowers or immediate family contributors. Once the bank flagged the transfers, the lender did a routine compliance check and paused the loan. That meant Derek's parents suddenly realized that a large portion of the wedding had not been funded the way they were told. I didn't hear that directly. I heard it when Amanda showed up at my apartment Saturday morning, without the sweet smile this time. She said Derek's father was demanding documentation. He wanted proof that the dispute was minor and temporary. He was threatening to pull their contribution entirely if there was legal exposure. I asked her if Derek knew where the money originally came from. She hesitated for half a second. That was enough. She said Dad told them it was a family reallocation. That I had agreed. That I was investing in her future. I almost admired the creativity. Amanda said if Derek's family backed out, they would lose the vineyard. The yacht. Probably half the vendors. The wedding would have to be scaled down or postponed. She said I was destroying her life over money I hadn't even used. That was the first time I told her. I told her about the diagnosis. About the clinical trial in Boston. About the 14-day deadline. About the fact that I had been planning to relocate quietly without telling anyone until it was certain. She sat there staring at me like I had spoken in another language. She asked why I never said anything. I told her because every time something serious happened in this family, it somehow turned into being about her. For once I wanted something to just be mine. She didn't apologize. She asked if I could at least pause the escalation until after the wedding. I said no. That afternoon Mr. Halpern called again. 2 major vendors had decided to reverse partial payments preemptively rather than risk entanglement in a fraud case. The Vineyard was one of them. A 6-figure reversal. The funds were being held pending investigation, which meant the money was no longer fully in Amanda's wedding. It was in limbo. Recoverable. But here was the twist none of us expected. When the lender reviewed Derek's financial disclosures more closely, they found inconsistencies unrelated to my case. Inflated income projections tied to a startup he claimed was about to secure funding. It wasn't. The loan was denied outright. The wedding was now underfunded by a massive gap. And Derek's father was furious. By Sunday night Amanda called me again. Not to argue. To tell me the wedding was officially postponed. Indefinitely. She said Derek needed time to sort things out. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. She said maybe Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he left the money to me. I didn't respond. Because for the first time since all this started I wasn't laughing. I was waiting. Waiting to see if my father would fight the criminal referral. Or if he would finally choose to settle. Because the bank's investigation report was due in 3 days. And once it was finalized there was no pulling it back. The bank finalized its report on a Wednesday. Intentional structuring. Unauthorized transfers. Beneficiary funds misappropriated. It sounded clinical on paper. Detached. Clean. It didn't mention Thanksgiving dinners or childhood bedrooms or the way my dad used to check my math homework. Mr. Halpern called me that afternoon. He said the report had been forwarded to the district attorney's office for review. Charges were possible but not guaranteed. Sometimes cases like this settled before it reached that stage. An hour later my dad called. Not to argue. Not to justify. He asked to meet. We sat in Mr. Halpern's conference room. Just the 3 of us. No Amanda. No Derek. No Mom. Dad looked older than I remembered. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal. Full restitution of the stolen funds. Immediate repayment using a combination of liquidated assets and a home equity line. Legal fees covered. A formal written admission of unauthorized transfers to satisfy the bank's recovery requirements. In exchange, I would request that the district attorney consider the matter resolved civilly. Mr. Halpern didn't say anything. He let me decide. I asked one question. Why? Dad said he thought it would be temporary. He said Amanda was under pressure. Derek's family had expectations and he believed I would understand. He said I never asked for anything. That was the problem. I signed the settlement agreement the next day. Within a week, the reversed vendor payments and the funds from my father's assets were transferred back into my account. Every cent. Plus interest. My dad took out a line against the house to cover what couldn't be liquidated quickly. My mom stopped calling. Amanda moved out of state with Derek anyway, but the wedding never happened. I heard through a cousin that his startup folded completely a month later. I didn't attend any family gatherings after that. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. 2 days before the clinical trial deadline, I wired the deposit to the hospital in Boston. I signed my intake forms alone in a small apartment I rented near the research center. The night before my first treatment, I got one final message from Amanda. She wrote that she had finally read Grandpa's original trust letter. I had never seen it myself. Mr. Halpern forwarded me a scanned copy that same night. In it, Grandpa explained why he structured the inheritance the way he did. He wrote that I was resilient but often underestimated. He wrote that sometimes the quiet ones need protection not because they are weak, but because they are surrounded by people who mistake silence for permission. At the bottom he added one sentence. Sydney will laugh when she is hurt. That is how you will know something is wrong. I didn't laugh reading that. For the first time in months I cried. Not because I lost my family, but because I realized I had almost lost myself trying to be the one who didn't need anything. The treatment started the next morning. And for once in my life, the money that was meant for me was finally doing exactly what it was supposed to do.